If this is your first time studying this set work, I recommend you watch this introduction as I'll explain some concepts that we'll be encountering a lot as we analyse this piece. If you're just using this video for revision, you can skip ahead to the detailed analysis here. Movement 2 of Poulenc's trio for oboe, bassoon and piano is a neoclassical piece. In a nutshell, neoclassicism involved 20th century composers taking classical concepts and conventions and giving them a more modern 20th century twist. Throughout this analysis, I'll be pointing out where Poulenc has messed about with classical ideas and how he's given this music a more modern flavour. In terms of the musical knowledge you'll need to have to analyse this piece, at a most basic level you'll need to be able to read standard staff notation. The good thing about this piece is that oboe and bassoon are not transposing instruments, meaning everything sounds exactly as it's written and you won't need to worry about transposing on the fly. So you just want to make sure you can read treble and bass clef with confidence. The usual accidentals appear in this piece, the naturals, sharps and flats. We do however get a handful of double flats, and these are exactly what they say on the tin. You flatten a note and then you flatten it again. For example, to play a B double flat on the piano, you start on B, you then flatten it to get B flat, and then you flatten it again to get A, or what looks like an A but is actually written as B double flat. And that begs the question, why bother? Why not just say A natural? And sure, from a purely practical standpoint, it can be a pain to sight read double flats and double sharps, but from an analytical perspective, having double flats can sometimes make more sense. For example, this is D flat minor, and you can see here in the submedian it has a B double flat chord. That's just how this pretty rarely used scale is written, and we do actually encounter this key in the piece. Another concept that's essential to understanding this analysis is scale degrees and chords. Understanding what I mean when I say things like tonic, dominant, subdominant, supertonic, etc. will help make this analysis much easier to process, but if you're less familiar with these terms, I'll try and mention the chord number as much as possible. Now obviously not every A-level student will be able to instantly work out what a flattened major supertonic B flat minor is, so if you are one of those people, I have created this reference sheet which has chord tables, scales and other bits of information to help you. The relevant figure numbers will appear in the video as I explain each concept, because it can be helpful to put these things into context. It goes without saying that this is not an official Eduqas resource and you must not take this into the exam. This is a revision tool only. There are other more advanced concepts like octatonicism, modal mixtures and Neapolitan harmony, but I'll explain these things in full as we work through the piece. The last thing I'll say before starting this analysis is that I've taken all of these notes from proper Eduqas resources. My main reference point were the detailed Eduqas notes, which you can find on their website, but I've also added a couple of points mentioned in the past paper mark schemes as well, which are also available for free on their website. It's a very good idea to download all of these and use them for your revision, as practice testing is proven to be the best way to revise. For the score itself, I've used the exact edition recommended by Eduqas. The only difference I've made is I've added those bar numbers, which you can do as you go along, and obviously I've added the bits of analysis as well. At the time of recording, this score is freely available via IMSLP, so hopefully you won't have too much trouble getting a hold of it. Without further ado, let's begin this analysis. Poulenc's trio for oboe, bassoon and piano is a 3-movement work. We're looking at second movement here, the Andante, and we already get a neoclassical feature straight away in that the keys of the movements are not related. Movement 1 is in A major, movement 2 begins in B flat major, and movement 3 is in D flat major. These keys don't have any strong functional relationship to each other, so we describe them as unrelated. In a true classical work, we'd expect maybe the first movement to be in the tonic, the second in the dominant, maybe even a relative minor somewhere. We certainly don't get that here. We're not going to analyse the first or third movements in any meaningful way, but knowing their starting keys is important to understanding the structure of the piece. Speaking of which, there are a couple of ways we can look at how this second movement is structured. If we're going with a more classical approach, we could say that the movement is in ternary form, A-B-A. Bars 1 to 22 would be A, bars 23 to 51 would be B, and then bars 52 to the end would be the second A section. But, as the Eduqas notes state, there are a few problems with this interpretation. Firstly, the two A sections are not in the same key. Secondly, there isn't a clear contrast between the A and B section. The B here feels more like a continuation of the previous A section, so it's not a clearly marked separate section. Thirdly, the last A section, as you can see here, is really short. We could even say it's more of a coda, which is a usually short closing passage of a movement. And sure, it references a lot of material from the first A section, but it does so many different things with the melodies and harmonies that it is a little bit of a leap to say it's just a modified version of that opening A section. So this ternary idea is problematic, but there is another structural interpretation we can use that might make more sense. Eduqas calls this a tonal transition, and in order to understand it we need to look at the keys of all three movements again. Movement 1 is in A major, while movement 3 is in D flat major, which is 3 half steps or 3 semitones away. Movement 2 actually bridges that gap by starting in B flat major, moving to B minor, then moving to C major, which leads us on to the D flat major of the third movement. And if you have a look at movement 2 in 22 bar intervals, you can actually see this harmony there. So the first bars are in B flat major, bar 23 onwards is in B minor, and then bar 45 onwards is in C major. The 2019 mark scheme refers to this as a tripartite structure. The piece ends on F major and F minor, but Eduqas describes this as an intermediary tonality. Also, F minor and the third movement's D flat major are very closely related chords. You only actually need to change one note to get from one to the other. So these are your two structural interpretations. It's important to understand both for the exam. The mark schemes accept the ternary form idea, so you shouldn't just ignore it just because it's not perfect. But if you're given, say, a 5-mark question on structure, you'll likely be expected to understand this tonal transition idea as well. The movement begins in B flat major with a 4-bar piano phrase over a tonic B flat pedal. The first 2 bars are fairly normal. You can see some chromatic auxiliary notes in the melody, like the C sharp in bar 1, and the 2019 mark scheme describes these auxiliary notes as being typical of the classical style. Bar 3 is where we get our first slightly weirder neoclassical harmony. You'll have noticed the D and G flats here, and that's because this is a G flat major chord. If we try to relate this chord to B flat major, you could say it's the flattened major submediant or flattened major chord 6. This is seemingly unrelated to B flat major. However, this is our first example of modal mixture, borrowing notes or chords from the parallel key. So let's break down what this means. Parallel keys are actually quite a simple concept. A major and minor key that start on the same note can be described as parallel. So in this instance, B flat major and B flat minor are parallel keys. If you look at these chord tables, you can see that while the chord G flat major doesn't appear in the key of B flat major, it does appear as the submediant of B flat minor, or chord 6. This means that although these opening 4 bars are in B flat major, we've borrowed this submediant chord from B flat minor, and this is our modal mixture. The Eduqas notes describe a perfect cadence in bars 3 to 4, which is outlined by what sort of looks like an F dominant 7th chord in the second half of bar 3. However, we still have the G flats in there, plus the B flat pedal in the bass. So this isn't really a straightforward 5-1 cadence. We could also view this as an A diminished 7th chord leading to the tonic. That's also mentioned in one of the mark schemes. In response to the opening melody in the piano, we see a 4-bar complementary melody in the bassoon at bars 5 to 8. Poulenc has tonicized the dominant, or chord 5, F major, and we see a perfect 5-1 cadence from C dominant 7 to F major in these bars 7 to 8, with those descending 6 in the piano right hand. This 3/8 bar at the end is another neoclassical feature. This means that this 4-bar phrase is actually cut a quaver short, or the next 4-bar phrase starts a quaver early. This is unexpected to the listener and has the effect of making the phrase sound imbalanced. We're back in B flat for bars 9 to 10, and the significant thing here is that bar 10 is the last time we see the key of B flat in the entire piece. This links to what I said at the start about the problematic ternary form. We'd normally expect B flat major to come back at some point, probably in the second A section. Bar 11 then moves to E flat major, the giveaway here being that A flat accidental in the left hand. The chords in this bar are 4 in first inversion, 5 in first inversion, and 1. That's subdominant, dominant, and tonic. Bar 12 then moves to D flat major, and again we can tell from those extra flats. The chord movement is exactly the same as the previous bar, so 4 in first inversion, 5 in first inversion, and 1. Bar 13 features another modal mixture chord, borrowing notes and chords from the parallel key, in exactly the same way as bar 3, but this time in the key of D flat major. So we see B double flats in the right hand, which are not present in D flat major, but they are there in D flat minor. This means that this chord is a B double flat major, the submediant chord 6 of D flat minor, so we borrowed that chord from that parallel D flat minor key. Bar 13 then finishes with an A flat chord, the dominant of chord 5 in first inversion, leading to a D flat chord at bar 14, which is the tonic. A perfect cadence, but again, not an especially clear one. Bar 14 also features an A-flat chord, which again resolves to D-flat in bar 15, this time a much clearer perfect cadence with the descending thirds in the piano right hand. Because of those repeated A-flat chords and the brief outline of E-flat dominant 7th in bar 14, we could also read bars 13 to 14 in A-flat major, and this gives us Neapolitan harmony. A Neapolitan chord is a flattened major supertonic or flat 2, more often used in minor keys. This was used a fair bit in true classical music, but usually found as part of a cadential progression. Poulenc does not use Neapolitan harmony in that way in this piece. So looking at bar 13, the supertonic of A flat is B flat minor. Flattening this and making it major would give us B double flat major, the chord that appears in this bar. In true classical harmony, Neapolitan chords tend to appear in first inversion, which we call Neapolitan 6, and we actually do see that here with the D flat in the bass, but again, this chord has no cadential function. Bars 15 to 16 are simply a repeat of bars 1 to 2, reharmonized in D flat major. Because of that repeat of the first 2 bars, we'd actually expect a repeat of the whole 4-bar phrase, but there are some key differences. Bar 17 is where we'd expect that modal mixture chord again, the B double flat major, but instead we get an A minor chord, this enharmonic equivalent of B double flat minor. Bar 17 ends with a B major chord resolving to E minor at bar 18, which is a perfect 5-1 cadence, establishing a new key of E minor. This is functionally unrelated to the opening B flat major being a tritone away. The bassoon continues to double the melody in bars 17 to 18. We get a new oboe melody at bars 19 to 20 using previously heard dotted and semiquaver rhythms and an imperfect cadence in B major, the dominant of E minor, with B major in bar 20 and its own dominant chord F sharp in bar 21. This is not a simple F sharp chord though, as bar 21 gives us our first clear example of octatonic writing in the piece. The octatonic scale is an 8-note scale with alternating tones and semitones. The particular octatonic scale used here starts on F sharp, with the first interval being a semitone. Looking at bar 21, we see an F sharp in the left hand and the notes of C major in the right hand arpeggio. C, E and G are all found in this particular octatonic scale, though if you look at figure 2a on your reference sheet, bear in mind you'll see a B sharp instead of C. Those are enharmonic equivalents. So while there's the suggestion of a 1-5 imperfect cadence across bars 20 to 21, the Eduqas notes call this an octatonically tinged cadence. There's more octatonicism in bar 22 with an F sharp dominant 7th in the piano, followed by a descending octatonic scale. The notes in the oboe and bassoon in this bar also fit with the octatonic scale. That brings us to the end of the first sections in both the structural interpretations we mentioned at the start, the end of the A section in ternary form and the end of the first 22-bar section in the tripartite tonal transition structure. And here we get yet more neoclassical elements. In typical classical ternary form, we might expect this A section to end with a perfect cadence in its opening key, B flat major. But what we get instead is an octatonically tinged imperfect cadence in B major, making this a very neoclassical treatment of ternary form. We start the B section, or the next key in our tripartite structure, in B minor, though there are no tonic root position chords here. All the B minor chords are in first or second inversion. Another neoclassical feature to mention here is that there is no clear contrast with the previous section, as you might expect in ternary form. The music here feels more like a continuation than a brand new section. By contrast, the mark schemes mention a typically classical feature here in the accompaniment. The arpeggio and broken chord figurations in the piano, both in this system and the next, are the sort of thing you'd expect to see in true classical works. The only thing mentioned in the Eduqas notes for this system is the Neapolitan harmony in bar 28 with a G dominant 7th chord. This has no clear functional relationship to the B minor key, but it's the dominant chord 5 of the flattened major supertonic, or flat 2, the Neapolitan chord. And if you need some more explanation of that, it is in the reference sheet. Bar 29 is a continuation of the Neapolitan harmony with a C major chord in first inversion. There's a major 7th in there with the B naturals in the right hand, so it's not quite a straightforward Neapolitan 6th chord, but it still counts as Neapolitan harmony because it's still a version of that flattened major supertonic. Bar 30 gives us octatonic harmony again, and because of the move from the F sharp dominant 7th chord to the B minor chord in bar 31, we can describe this again as an octatonically tinged perfect cadence. This bar actually uses exactly the same octatonic scale as bar 21, where we had our previous octatonically tinged cadence, though in this bar it's more fleshed out with these chords in the right hand. Now, this is where things get a little bit dense. According to the Eduqas notes, these chords could be viewed as either dominant sevenths or augmented sixths. There are three main types of augmented sixth chord that were used frequently in classical music: the French, the Italian, and the German. And so these chords might be interpreted as German augmented sixths. Have a look at your reference sheet if you don't know what those are. Now, if you played a German augmented sixth and dominant seventh chord on their own on the piano, they'd sound pretty much exactly the same, but they serve different purposes. Dominant sevenths tend to lead to the tonic chord, whereas augmented sixths tend to lead to the dominant. We sometimes call German augmented sixths then predominant chords. Those Neapolitan sixth chords we keep mentioning are also sometimes called predominant chords. However, in bar 30, these chords don't really function in a predominant way. Another problem with calling these chords German augmented sixths is that they're voiced differently to a standard classical German sixth, which would normally be in third inversion with the minor sixth at the bottom of the chord. These chords in bar 30 have the augmented fourth of the chord at the bottom. Now, to be completely honest, if you don't really get any of that, I wouldn't spend hours trying to figure it all out. The only reason I'm explaining this is because when you read about this section in the Eduqas notes, it seems like a pretty random thing to mention. Overall, it's probably easier just to view these descending chords as dominant sevenths. The notes mention the A sharp here as being most likely a misprint, and the reason they say that is because this chord, if it fits with the rest of them in the bar, should be an A dominant seventh chord, but the A sharp messes that up. If you look a little bit later in the bar, you can see they've stuck a natural sign on this chord here, which is the same chord but just an octave lower, so that's why the notes say it's probably a mistake. Anyway, after all that, bar 30 leads to the tonic B major at bar 31, giving us that octatonically tinged perfect cadence. And then we have an E minor 9 chord at bar 32. In this next system, we're building up to the climactic part of the piece at bar 35, which you can see from these increasing dynamics. Bar 35 has some fairly extreme triple forte dynamics in all three instruments. And yet again, we get an octatonically tinged cadence at bar 34, which, yet again, uses the same octatonic scale as the previous two. You can see a C major chord over an F sharp in the piano, as well as a C major arpeggio in the bassoon, and the whole bar is a mixture of C major and F sharp 9. After all the first and second inversions of B minor that we've heard so far, we finally get a feeling of resolution at bar 35 with a root position chord, though it's a tierce to Picardy, meaning that it's a tonic major chord, B major, rather than the tonic minor. At bar 37, we see dominant sevenths in C minor, these G7 chords, as well as a closely linked diminished seventh on the second quaver beat, leading into a first inversion A flat major at bar 38. This creates an interrupted cadence, 5-6, dominant to submedium. Bar 37 could also be viewed as a larger 9-bar section that leads from a dominant G7 chord to a first inversion C major chord all the way over at bar 45, with chromatic movement in between. This is described in the Eduqas notes as a 5-1 progression with a chromatic sequence interpolated between, interpolated being just a fancy way of saying put in between. So after a G7 chord, we see A flat major in bars 38 to 39, A major in bar 40, B flat major in bars 41 to 42, B major in bars 43 to 44, and then finally a C major chord at bar 45. These chords are all moving up by a semitone. The sequence is irregular though, because the A flat major, B flat major, and B major chords all last for 2 bars, but if we go back to bar 40, you can see that the A major chord only lasts for 1 bar. The bassoon melody at bar 40 echoes the opening melody. In bars 41 to 42, the oboe restates the opening 2 bars of the melody, which repeats in the next 2 bars as a rising sequence that matches the rising harmonic movement just below in the accompaniment. There's a fleeting reference to B flat major here, but this is used as part of that rising harmonic sequence, so it's not really cemented as a key centre, and we would struggle to argue that the piece has returned to its tonic key here. If you look at these notes in the left hand, you get wrong note harmony, or as one mark scheme describes it, dissonant chromatic additions, in that they don't fit with the chords outlined in the bars. Wrong note harmony is a very typical neoclassical feature, and a pretty easy spot for this particular system. Bar 45 puts us firmly in C major, which means we've reached the third section of the tripartite tonal transition structural interpretation mentioned at the start. And for the first time in a while, there are no accidentals in this system at all. These 4 bars are entirely diatonic. This brings some closure to all of that chromatic movement in the previous 2 systems, though C major still isn't strongly stated here as it's in first inversion with the E in the bass. And then chromaticism comes back at bars 49 to 50 with the tonicization of the subdominant chord F major at bar 49, and we've got a perfect 5-1 cadence going from C major to F major. In bar 50, we've got the tonicization of the supertonic chord to D minor, and we see a diminished 7th chord neatly resolving onto a D minor chord here. The 2/8 bar here increases the harmonic rhythm, making each chord last only 1 quaver, while in bar 49 they've lasted for 2 quavers each. The use of this supertonic D minor suggests that we're going to get a perfect cadence in C major, because chord 2 usually leads to chord 5, the dominant, which usually leads to chord 1, the tonic, if we're looking for a perfect cadence, but we actually get another unexpected chord here. Bar 51 starts with a G half diminished chord, which is a version of the supertonic chord 2 in the key of F major, with a C dominant 7th at the end of the bar, leading to an F major tonic in bar 52, which establishes the new key. If we're following the ternary form structure, bar 52 brings us back to the A1 section. And there we have another neoclassical feature that we've mentioned before. The A1 section doesn't take us back to the opening key of B flat major, but instead we're now in F major. Now we're heading into this final A section, and as we mentioned at the start, it's much shorter than the previous sections, and with the exception of bar 59 and 61, the whole thing happens over a pedal note, making the harmony feel much more static. In the Eduqas notes, there's the argument that this last A section is more of a coda, a shorter passage to close this piece than a whole section in itself. Bars 52 to 55 closely mirror the opening 4-bar phrase, this time in F major, and includes the modal mixture D flat major chord at bar 54, the submediant chord 6 of the parallel key F minor. Check the reference sheet to see all the chords in both of those keys. The only other thing to mention is the addition of the acciacchaturas in the left hand of the piano, which we didn't see at the start. Unlike the previous 4 bars, this answering phrase from the bassoon is not like the opening of the piece at all, with new harmony and a new bassoon melody to match. If this was a repeat of the opening section, the tonic pedal would stop here at bar 57, but we can see it actually goes on for 1 more bar. The oboe melody at bar 58 is less of a continuation of the previous bassoon melody as it was originally at bar 8, but it feels much more like a new theme here. The perfect cadence in the dominant key that we saw in bars 7 to 8 does not happen in the same way here. Though C major is outlined a little bit in bar 57, there's no clear cadence here, and rather than continuing with this dominant chord in the next section, we instead go back to F major at bar 58. Some more chromaticism is introduced in this system. Bar 59 contains a subdominant chord 4, but it's not a straightforward B-flat major chord. We could describe this as a B-flat minor 6th / major 7th chord, meaning that it's a B-flat minor chord with a minor 6th, G, and a major 7th, A natural added on top. We're back to the tonic F major at bar 60 and back in the subdominant again in bar 61. This time the chord is B-flat half diminished 7th. Again, this is a more chromatic, minor sounding chord than a simple B-flat major subdominant. The subdominant to tonic 4-to-1 movement gives us plagal cadences, but again, those unusual subdominant chords here give them a neoclassical twist. And at last we reach the final system of the piece. Bar 62 begins with an F minor chord, and the rest of the notes of the bar are all octatonic, this time following an octatonic scale starting on F. There's no fifth or no C in this first F minor chord, and that's because the C wouldn't fit the octatonic scale being used. Instead, Poulenc adds the C to the final chord to make it a complete F minor, giving a sense of finality to the closing of the piece. The last odd thing to mention here are the time markings at the very end. You can just see them down here. They don't actually link to anything in the next movement. If you look at the first bar of the rondo, it starts on a D flat chord. There's no real explanation given to why Poulenc included these markings. And that's the analysis done. It's a lot of information, but with regular practice and revision, you'll be able to remember it just fine. If I were an A-level student revising this piece, I'd get a blank version of the score, pick a random system, and write down as many things as I can remember about those bars. I then refer back to my notes or these videos to see if I've missed anything. You could even test yourself on specific bars by using some sort of random number picker. Just make sure you set your range between 1 and 64 if you're doing that. If this is your very first time analysing this piece, I recommend you give yourself a break, then revisit this analysis tomorrow from the very beginning to see which bits you understand better. Do that again after a couple more days off, then again after a few more days. This is called spaced repetition, and it stops you from forgetting too much and having to go back and relearn the piece from scratch every time. However you go about it though, good luck, and I hope you do well in your exam.